Hello, everyone. I'm Gary Berman from DevOps.com and the host of the Cyberhero Adventures Show. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to another great DevOps.com webinar. Today, we're going to learn about the new Pentest as a Service Impact Report 2020, referred to as PtaaS. But before we get to today's presentation, let's go over just a few housekeeping items. As you see, we use the GoToWebinar system, so for many of you, you'll see the control panel. Take a moment to click on the questions icon in the little downward arrow. This webinar is designed to be highly interactive with our great speakers. So we welcome your questions, comments, and suggestions in real time, and we'll get to as many as possible. If for some reason we're unable to get your question, we'll email you the replies. We also have several cool poll questions so we can hear from you, and keep in mind that there are no right or wrong answers to these questions. This webinar is being recorded and the slides will be available on demand at devops.com in a couple of hours. Additionally, we have a giveaway of 4 $25 Amazon gift cards at the end of today's webinar, so stay tuned to see if you are one of today's lucky winners. And now, a special thank you to our sponsors for today's webinar. Dr. Chenxi Wang is the managing partner, Rain Capital, and a frequent Forbes contributor. Hi, Chenxi.
Hi, Gary. How are you?
It's so nice to hear you. We would love to see you, but we're so glad that you're with us by phone. Thanks for adjusting your schedule. Ryan Stinson is the manager of security engineering at HubSpot. Hey, Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, so glad to be here today.
Yeah, we're really excited. You're doing some incredibly cool stuff, and I know our audience is going to be really interested in learning about some of your new research as well. And last but not least is Caroline Wong. She's the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt.io. Hi, Caroline. Caroline, let's begin by sharing the context and some of the key findings of the report with our audience as we go to the next slide. Caroline, you have to unmute your phone, your video.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I was just saying that, we've actually got this backdrop of software development practices that are changing, as well as application security priorities getting more important. And so this is really looking at pen testing in the context of application security becoming a top priority, and particularly enterprise organizations conducting manual pen tests more frequently and more broadly than ever before. Organizations quite simply need to find, fix, and prevent application security issues, and manual pen testing is one way to do that. I think another backdrop piece that I'll mention is that we've got DevOps going on, such that traditional software development methodologies allowed for gates in a waterfall style method. But today with DevOps, we're looking at much more frequent software releases. And so looking at how something that's been around for a long time, like pen testing, can actually evolve to better suit what customers need and are looking for.
And, what is your opinion about the nature of changing, kind of a culture that's been ingrained for some period of time? You think that's going to be something that's easy, difficult, something in the middle?
I think it always depends. I think that when it comes to culture change, the thing that makes it happen is being able to actually solve problems. So if we see software development organizations saying, I have a problem, I really want to do manual pen testing because I recognize that there are certain application security vulnerabilities that actually can't be detected using scanners and machines only. So I really want to do manual pen testing, but I need to figure out a way to do it more frequently to line up with the cadence of my software releases. And so I think that when there's a problem and then a solution comes in that's available, then I think culture change happens faster. I think that it happens slowly when the problem exists, but there's not a solution that matches.
And Ryan, you have some firsthand knowledge of that with your, research that you embarked on, with HubSpot. Can you share with our audience a little bit about that and about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the points that Caroline's making resonate. We publish new software literally tens of thousands of times a week. Our DevOps cadence is very, very fast. Our deploy cadence is continual. So for us, having the solution that makes it easy to deploy either small kind of focused pen tests or even broader ones, and easily bring those results back into ticket tracking and issue tracking into a place where we can make sure that they're resolved very quickly, smoothing out all of those bits of friction that exist between scheduling a pen test and finding pen testing resources and executing the pen test and then getting those results worked on. Each one of those friction points is something that you don't have a tolerance for the faster your DevOps cycle works. And one of the things that we found is as we smooth all of those things out, it gives us a lot more flexibility to schedule iterative pen tests and really get the comprehensiveness that we're looking for.
And you recently have had some success, in a country study. Can you share with our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we just recently wrapped up one of our more comprehensive pen tests. As I mentioned, we do pen testing very iteratively, internally, externally. We had a 3 pen tests that just wrapped up a couple days ago at the end of last week. And we're in that, have been in that collaboration process with the security researchers, getting really hard-hitting results. Every time we have a pen test, we really try and focus security researchers and other pen testers on the things that might be the soft underbelly, might be the opportunity for attack in the future. And we get a lot of wonderful results in terms of innovating testing approaches, innovative results, like a really wonderful third-party perspective on where we might be weak and where we can strengthen our defenses.
So as we go to the next slide, Chenxi, what Ryan's talking about is incredibly important, which is feedback. And, it's widely understood that in DevOps you have feedback loops. What can you share with our audience about feedback and how is that going in the world of pen testing?
Well, so DevOps is about moving fast, about being agile, and about having tight feedback loops so you can make small micro adjustments as you move fast. And that is, as Caroline said earlier, is the how software development methodology is changing. And as that is the background, security and application security really has to change accordingly. And those of us who are in software development knows that in the past we do waterfall releases. We do major releases maybe once a year or twice a year, and maybe we do pen testing at the end of the release cycle just before deployment or maybe during deployment. But this kind of frequency really can't accommodate the new modern software development model, which DevOps is a principle, right? So with that, what we are looking at is application security now also becomes more agile. We want to do smaller testing, more frequent testing, and move alongside the DevOps workflow as they move down the pipeline. So once a year pen testing or twice a year pen testing simply doesn't work. So that's why people are looking at more agile pen testing, and for which penetration testing as a service comes into play, right? And that's also driven by another driver, which is application security, which Caroline and I did a similar study about 2.5 years ago. In that study, we saw many organizations, when they deployed pen testing, it is for compliance, which was the top cited driver. But this year, when we did the continued this study, the priority that is driving application security has moved from compliance to security because heightened awareness or because many data security, data privacy reasons, many organizations are treating application security as a top priority. So driven by DevOps, driven by increased priority of application security, we see that penetration testing is moving to a faster, more agile pace.
Wow, that's terrific. And as we launch our first poll question of the day, Caroline, one of the interesting things that I've learned is the challenge of deciding, kind of who's in charge of application security. So this is our first question. Select one of the following. Is it security? Is it development? Or is it both? And go ahead and put your answers in. And the reason I think this is an incredibly cool and important question is because how do you get people to play nice? Everybody's had their own sandbox. And now with this new way of thinking about things, people have to cooperate. How do you do that?
So from my perspective, PtaaS fits into DevOps really well because it facilitates collaboration and communication between engineers, between security folks, and between pen testers, so that during a pen test, there's actually an ongoing discussion between these different teams, so that, for example, at the beginning of a pen tester can ask developers, what are the product's intended use cases? Throughout the pen test, developers can ask questions like, can you tell me more about this security issue? I don't understand it. Pen testers can provide custom advice on how to resolve security issues, and that can be like a two-way conversation. It's not just a couple of paragraphs of text provided in a PDF. There's a tremendous difference in the ability to communicate when it's a two-way platform. Security can provide guidance on which issues ought to be a priority. And when we come to not only the finding part, but also the fixing part, engineering can make sure that the fixes are actually put in place. And then they can go back and ask the pen testers, hey, can you please retest and make sure that these vulnerabilities were in fact mitigated? So here's where kind of for a PtaaS solution, the power of the platform really allows these different groups who are ultimately, I think, all responsible for application security to come together and work together toward that common goal at kind of a speed and at a pace that matches what we see modern companies doing as they're developing software.
I mean, as a listener of this, I actually just got goosebumps because that just makes so much sense, doesn't it?
It's exciting. It's exciting, and it does, right?
It just makes a lot of sense. So, Ryan, as we go to the next slide, maybe you can share with our audience your perspective on that. I mean, is this the sort of the Holy Grail? Because the results from our first poll clearly showed, I think the number was 79%, that people think it is both, which is, a good answer.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it is. It's the collaboration, the ability to collaborate around pen tests means that if I'm a developer receiving issues, I'm an active stakeholder in making sure that the scope of the pen test is appropriate, that the kinds of things that are coming back are ideas that resonate with me, that they're valid, that they're reproducible, like all of those kinds of things. You, through collaboration, having a means and having a platform to talk continuously with pen testers in the middle of it, as opposed to just being on the receiving end of a static PDF. Kind of to Caroline's point, I think that wins you a lot of rapport. It creates it creates a team that everybody's a part of, as opposed to some kind of security versus development dichotomy. I think the other point is when you think about security needs, or kind of to one of your original points about the focus changing and priorities changing. We're all in the business of serving our customers best, and that growing recognition is, or the recognition is growing, that business health is related to security and data protection initiatives. Those are closely intertwined now in a way that I don't think we recognized fully several years ago. And so when you can create stories, when you can create roadmap items where you're integrating your pen test results, where you're integrating some of the feedback that you're getting over the course of these security initiatives into stories where you're driving customer benefit, where you're better protecting your customer. Like that helps get everybody on board, gets everybody focused in the same direction and aligned around a goal that's clearly in the company's best interest, clearly in your own teams and your other stakeholders' best interests.
Indeed. And Chenxi, you had mentioned that you had done some research, prior to this year's research. Maybe you can share with our audience, like on this question, why are companies expanding scopes and frequencies? Are you finding that from your longitudinal research that you've done before?
Yeah, I think that's partially related to the last point we discussed, which was companies are improving application security priority, right? So this is they're investing more budget into application security. They're having more stringent requirements, partially driven by customers, partially driven by regulations for some of them. So higher priority means a more heightened awareness, more budget, and hence they're expanding testing scopes, they're testing more applications, they're testing more frequently. 2.5 years ago, we found most companies are testing their applications once a year. In this study, the standard thing was testing every 6 months, but for mission critical applications, people are testing it once every quarter or even more frequently.
And so as we look at our next poll question, one of the things that kind of strikes me is this switch that you mentioned earlier from compliance, to a now proactive, posture. Does this have any sort of risk management implications? Like because you're now proactive, does that in a legal setting or risk management setting, where does that sit?
Are you asking me?
Anyone?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in if you all don't mind. I think that when it comes to risk management and application security, there are a number of reasons why organizations are prioritizing application security, and I think some of them have to do with things like, we want AppSec to be a competitive differentiator for our organization. In other cases, as Chenxi had mentioned, in 2017, we saw that organizations want to do stuff like, we have to comply with such and such regulatory requirement. We need to meet such and such contractual obligation. We want to, hit this percentage in terms of such and such industry standard. And certainly, I think that from a risk management perspective, organizations have traditionally wanted to be able to achieve a defensible level of due care. I think that today, what I'm observing when I talk to our customers and folks throughout the industry is that those risk management objectives remain in place. And in addition to those, folks want to do things like prevent the same AppSec defects from occurring over and over again. Things like reduce the probability that attackers can cause critical applications to stop functioning. Things like requiring fixes for bugs for which well-known attacks exist. And so I think part of it is simply that I see practitioners getting more savvy about application security and moving beyond sort of a checklist, here are the things we have to do application security, and moving to kind of a more holistic, kind of outcomes-based thinking about it. And then what happens is that, PtaaS ends up being a productivity tool, so that we've got customers like Ryan and many others trying to compress the time it takes to complete a pen test and fix the issues. And so our goal actually is to minimize the time spent per manual pen test, but at the same time, maximize the number of pen tests managed. So that today, our average enterprise clients manage 10 pen tests per year on Cobalt, and we expect to see that grow, because certainly organizations, some of these have thousands of applications and do hundreds and hundreds of tests per year. And so we're able to come in and say, hey, can we help your folks collaborate and add value in that way? Can we also allow you to manage more pen tests and minimize the time spent per pen test?
Terrific. And as we go to the next slide, Ryan, what has your experience been, as a client of Cobalt? I assume you're, a satisfied client because you're on this webinar. So on behalf of everyone, thank you. But what has your experience been? Has it compressed the time? Has it reduced errors? Give us some metrics.
Yeah, so we are able to get better comprehensiveness. To Caroline's point, we do split up all of our pen testing efforts into these shorter duration, focused scope kinds of engagements, where we're really looking to hit really hard the aspects of the HubSpot platform that are new or novel or prone to abuse. We try and focus pen testers around some of those kinds of objectives, but at the same time, we're typical of the Cobalt customer base in that we have these multiple pen tests who, when you put them all together, provide us the comprehensiveness that we need. I think moving from a traditional pen testing model, especially with a third party, where you put out a statement of work and you get consulting companies to come back, and then you work on them with the scope and hammering that out, and then everything goes dark, and then the test happens, and then everything goes dark, and then you get a PDF. That model works really well in terms of certain kinds of situations. Certainly if you're in more of a waterfall development model, you can line those things up really well, and you have the kind of structure that is helpful for project managers. When you're always releasing new code, when you're always releasing new features, when you're always putting out new product, being able to kind of quickly write up a scope statement, quickly focus testers around the area where you want them to focus on, where you think you should have fears, but also giving them broad access to kind of range and roam and find things that you maybe didn't originally foresee. Being able to do those things simply and quickly and collaboratively it smooths that process out so dramatically and makes the iterations a lot more seamless overall.
That just makes sense.
Yeah, I would. So can I add to that? I think a lot of people listening would know that when you do pen testing, traditional pen testing, you bring pen testers to look at your system, and it's a black box process in the sense that for 2 weeks or maybe 2-3 weeks you don't see anything, you don't get any results, and then in comes a PDF report, which tells, it could be many pages, could be hundreds of pages, documenting the tests and the results. Now the problem is, within the 2-week period you don't get anything, and to process that report takes a tremendous amount of effort. You have to validate whether the tests were the tests done were the right tests. You have to triage the results and then trace back to root cause. So that takes a tremendous amount of effort. And a lot of organizations, in the end of a pen test, that report just sits on the shelf and collecting dust. Within pen testing as service, what's happening is, once you onboard the testers in the system, you immediately see tests being conducted, you see results, you see partial results. And one of the best things is you're able to start triaging right away once you see a test. And sometimes a few hours into the test, you see a result, and you can start triaging, and the developers can ask a question in real time to the testers as they're doing tests. So to dramatically reduce the time to result and time to triage, which are two very important things for DevOps.
Indeed. And as we launch our next poll question, one of the interesting things that I've come across is this idea that pen testers, may focus on certain verticals. We'll come to that as we answer the question, what drives your pen testing? You can select any one of the following: customers, compliance. We use pen testing to improve our app security, or all the above. So you can enter your responses to this one. And while we're waiting for the responses, I'll just throw this out to any of our great panelists. So many pen testers focus on particular verticals, financial services, healthcare, so on and so forth. Does your system cut across all these horizontally, or is it vertically organized?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We tend to see the most positive response from what we call sort of cloud-first SaaS businesses. HubSpot is a great example of that. But at the same time, we're certainly seeing a lot of uptake from other sort of compliance-driven verticals like healthcare. So it's really quite across the board. I think that if I were to zoom out, you know, it's clear to me that the reason you do security is to protect value, and value today has been shifting from the physical to the digital. You know, the more that happens, the more cybersecurity is going to be critical, the more manual pen testing is going to be necessary. So we actually have folks across verticals and across even what I'll call like system types. So we've got folks testing web applications, APIs, mobile, cloud configurations, network, internal and external. So it's really all of the above. And that is driven by our closed and exclusive Cobalt Core pen tester community.
And speaking of all of the above, I think the number was 68% answered the question, all of the above. So it's compliance, it's customers, it's everything. That seemed to make sense to you, Ryan?
Oh, absolutely. I think it makes perfect sense. You know, compliance initiatives are a great way to set a bar that you can't go below, right? And they're a wonderful way to help drive organizational maturity. From that point forward, the additional gains, whether it's in pen testing or in other parts of your AppSec program, are, to Caroline's point, about driving value for the company, driving value for customers, helping executives and other folks sleep a little bit better at night, understanding that we've done due diligence, we've exercised due care, and we've really, you know, gotten as far as we can ahead of where a lot of the real novel attacks are coming in, getting ahead and being proactive about identifying where our problems may exist, above and beyond that checklist, above and beyond the whether it's the OWASP or other kinds of guidelines you may use. You really want to be clever, be innovative, look at abuse, look at potential abuse, look at any number of different attack styles, and so you get a lot of value out of iterations. You get a lot of value out of making sure that people who spend their days thinking like attackers and launching attacks against different kinds of applications can bring to bear.
Well, we have a really interesting question from the audience pertaining to that. To paraphrase, you know, most of the AppSec tools are not kind of DevOps ready, according to this questionnaire. Where are things in terms of speed and accuracy, in your opinion?
Most of the apps. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I'll jump into that first. So I think I agree with the assessment that a lot of standalone tools won't get you there. You know, you could name any number of AppSec vendors, and it's not going to be the panacea that I think we'd like. So I think for us, it's about the layered approach. It's certainly in the context of vulnerability identification. It's about having a static code analyzer, some kind of SaaS product early, you know, pushing that far left into the development cycle, making sure that at build time or before build time, you're picking up the common mistakes that may lead to different kinds of bugs. And then there's you know, design reviews that are potentially pre-deployment, and certainly like once you have an MVP, making sure that there's a analysis of that design in that early kind of pilot phase. You pair that with your bug bounty program. You pair that with some internal testing, whether those things are automated or partially human driven, and then you additionally layer on your third-party pen tests to that. And then each of those, the nice thing, and kind of taking it back to the PtaaS focus, you need to be able to, depending on the size of your organization, depending on your budget, you need to be able to scale those things up and down. You need to be able to maximize your effort in the development cycle where you can get the most amount of value. There are some great tools that will do static code analysis that may work really well. You need some flexibility maybe to scale that up or down, kind of in a different context. You have the third-party pen tests. You need to be able to scale those things up or down. And delivering pen tests as a platform, being able to engage in pen tests as a platform lets you, again, kind of focus that scope, figure out where you're getting the most amount of value out of your pen testing program, and help use that to demonstrate value, demonstrate budget, and effectively demonstrate that the organization is doing what it should be to help find vulnerabilities before they become a big deal.
Indeed, and as we go to the next slide, I'm going to read this question verbatim because it's a good point of view, and it reads, people doing development keep talking about more collaboration, like agile, but aren't there things like pen testing that you want to be isolated? So the whole idea of non-collaborated, not discussed attack on a system, he goes on to say, I don't understand the purple team concept of achieving security. Can you explain the downside of maybe too much communications? What do you think of that, premise?
Well, there's the shared responsibility model still it's not exclusive with the what we call the segregation of duties, right? So you still want application security to be led by a specific team or specific set of pen testers for pen testing purposes, but application development is the engineer's responsibility. Now, shared responsibility means that they talk often, they share results, and they increase communication. So in the old pen testing model, the results of the pen tests often when it's passed on to the engineering team, it takes quite a bit of time for the engineering team to decipher what it really means, because the folks that's doing security testing didn't know how the application makeup was, didn't know the architecture, didn't know what it was at business context. So some of the tests they run are out of context or not relevant or not as relevant. It's not to say engineers should drive the test, but engineers would give context to the security testers so they can structure more relevant tests. And also, one of the things in this shared responsibility model I find really fascinating is that the engineers can ask questions directly to the security team while tests are ongoing. And same thing, the security testers can ask questions as well, and so that they can get the nuances of the application, and they can actually, for the remainder of the test, can focus their tests more in a more laser-focused way to drive the test so that they can get the best results and more in a more focused and proactive way. And I find that's really, really interesting.
And as we look at the next slide, one of the interesting things that I've experienced is, it's not easy for a lot of people within the IT and cybersecurity ecosystem to acknowledge they don't know something. What is your experience? How do you get people to acknowledge, I don't know, or fill in the gaps with legitimate, PtaaS information? Ryan, what do you think about that?
Well, so where I am, humility is a big part of our organizational culture. So personally, it doesn't come easy. That is a thing that I'm personally working on. But yeah, on both sides, right? So whether it's people who come from a pen testing background, that's my career background, asking developers, how did you build this? What does your architecture look like? Help walk me through your YAML. Help walk me through the way your service behaves. Or for developers, like, hey, I don't really understand how cross-site scripting works, or I don't understand how insecure direct object references work. I don't understand what you mean with these terms, or how you executed an attack. I think it kind of to the question, like, the more people can recognize that there are things happening that they don't have a lot of familiarity with, the more you can bring that collaboration together, the faster those resolutions can be. To Chenxi's point, the better you can get from issue identification to issue resolution. And I think that's the goal, especially in a DevOps model. A DevOps model requires both autonomy as well as a shared focus. And so,
forgive the interruption, but just on that point, Ryan or Caroline, it seems like you have to kind of create a culture that embraces this, that unfortunately, you're not just dealing with ones and zeros. These are human beings who have their own needs, their own egos, their own territorial, how do you get through that?
Yeah, I completely agree with the sentiment that Ryan was sharing around creating a humble and an open culture. One of the things that I've done in my career is, as a digital consultant, I was a BSIMM practice leader. I did over 3 dozen BSIMM assessments, BSIMM. It stands for Building Security and Maturity Model, and it's a descriptive and observable model of application security practices. Now, one of the things that I thought was so interesting was there's a section on threat intelligence. It basically says, hey, software security team, when you find out about stuff, do you sort of keep that information secret, or do you share it with folks? And it was super interesting for me to observe the difference between the cultures of these organizations, because certainly there is, from my perspective, an old school way of thinking that says, threat intelligence, like, we've got to keep it close to us and nobody can ever find out. And it's sort of like, okay, well, if nobody can ever find out, then what are you going to do with it? How are you going to turn that into actionable change for your organization? And I've really seen that shift. Certainly, industry-wide, I see organizations sharing a lot more information, with each other. I think within organizations, I also see different teams sharing information amongst themselves. Now, as Chenxi said, this has to be done purposefully. You're not going to email your entire company with, hey, let me tell you about our ongoing breach, but when you've had a pen test finding and that pen test finding has occurred over and over and over again, then maybe after you go and fix the most recent one, you have an opportunity to, for example, talk to folks about, hey, this is something that actually happened in our environment. I think that, what I've observed throughout my career is also that when it comes to training, and I think the relevant piece here is secure coding training for developers, sometimes folks, their eyes can glaze over really easily if they don't see themselves in what's being presented. Oh, such and such company got hacked, so that could never happen to us. But when the security leader turns out around and says, guess what, this did happen to us. Like, we fixed it now, but I need you to understand that this actually happened. This is actually happening. I actually find that engages folks in a different sort of way.
Wow, that's just a great thought. As we look at our next polling question, Chenxi, do you want to amplify what Caroline was talking about?
Yeah. So Caroline was talking about building a culture of openness and building a culture of collaboration, which is certainly a very important thing for today's modern organization. It's even more important if you want to practice DevOps, right? So again, DevOps, we said earlier, it's about tight loops, feedback loops, and giving each other the right information at the right time so we can all move fast. And one of the things that came up a little bit in the beginning of the discussion is that security used to be gatekeepers, right? In the traditional software development model. Today, the gatekeeper model does not work. We are moving to the more guardrail model, right? Guardrail meaning that we set certain standards and policies, making sure people align with those. But we cannot tell them they cannot move to the next stage of development. We just have to sort of corral them in the right direction. And being able to corral them, being able to do things more collaboratively, all require this open culture. And another thing that we didn't touch on, but it's actually very important, is setting the right incentives so the development team and the security team can work together on not only finding bugs, finding them faster, and help the organization move faster.
And speaking of timing, the results of the poll, I'll show 10% in development, 23% during Q&A, 33% prior to release, 7% in production, and 27%, throughout the process. I'll just throw this out to the team. It's a bit of a bell curve, it seems, but where is the optimal point, to begin this process, in your view?
I think pen testing should start as early as possible. In fact, we encourage developers to do unit tests as much as they can before even integration. So, and in DevOps, really test often, test early is the way to go.
Indeed.
And what that looks like is a little bit different, I think, between those phases, right? So I think it's a little bit about tailoring your testing process so that you have kind of phase appropriate activities across each of those phases.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with Ryan that different tests should be done in different stages. Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah,
So
I think
let's take 1 second, Caroline. Sorry. Let's
no
go
worries.
to the next slide. And sorry, Caroline, you were going to say?
Oh, that's quite all right. I was simply going to say that, I think that there's different times to engage with different types of testing. And what I've observed is that there's also a different way in which organizations that have different levels of cybersecurity maturity think about pen testing, such that what I have seen is that organizations that are a little lower in terms of their cybersecurity maturity kind of use pen testing as like, this is how we find stuff. Organizations that are higher in terms of their cybersecurity maturity will use pen testing almost as an out-of-band check to say, you know what, we've set up our software development lifecycle with various software activities that happen throughout. And then the purpose of an out-of-band pen test is actually to find out, well, what made it through our process? We've set up this whole process that is intended to prevent defects from being introduced, to find them early, to get them fixed. If something does make it through to the end, then that's what those, I think, higher maturity organizations really use pen testing for. And then it can help them to do process optimization and improvement throughout that life cycle.
And as we look at the next slide, I recently had the opportunity to present to the Department of Defense and people in that ecosystem about the cybersecurity maturity model, CMMC, which is for the audience who may not be familiar, is a new Department of Defense program that's going to require a certification of 5 different levels, that Caroline was just referring to about maturity. Ryan, where does this service fit in maybe supporting the maturity of the whole industry?
Yeah, I mean, I would be dishonest if I would say that HubSpot is at the far end of the maturity model. We are continuing to grow, we're continuing to evolve, we're certainly taking pen test results as a way of helping that growth. But the points that Caroline was making were exactly right. You have different things that you're doing over the course of your life cycle, over the course of any given deploy. And post-morteming your pen test results, figuring out what are the commonalities, what are we seeing frequently, and how do we re-inject back earlier into the process. Maybe we take our pen test results and we use some of those checks, if possible, in our static code analysis activities. There should be that continual feedback loop where one phase is helping strengthen and advise a previous phase.
Indeed. And as we look at the next slide, Chenxi, what is your experience and your point of view about offering, incentives, ideally positive incentives to encourage, this agility, this sharing, as opposed to negative incentives like, oh, if you don't, what is your research, either the work you've done before or this report, shine the light on that a little bit?
So let me talk about a model of incentive that didn't align very well. One of the organizations that I did research with had the engineering team's incentives aligned on how many features they go to market and the throughput of features, right? So the faster you bring features to market, the more your bonuses, the higher your bonuses are. But they had this application security team incentivized on the number of bugs they find. The more bugs you find, the higher your bonuses are. So clearly the two teams were working against each other, and it to the degree that it was oil and water, right? And so they had a new CIO this organization had a few years ago had a new CIO joined the organization, and he took a look at this situation and he's like, yeah, this is the wrong incentive structure. So what he had was he took the application security team and went from the centralized model to a decentralized model. So they got embedded into different engineering teams. Then he incentivized the whole engineering team for the speed to market with secure development, meaning that how many features you bring to market without bugs, that's the overall team incentive. So that's how he developed a new structure of incentive that enables collaboration and enables shared responsibility between security and engineering.
Indeed. And as we look at the next slide, one of friends of mine has been embarking on a meta-analysis funded by DARPA to understand best practices pertaining to software development, such as the optimal size of the group, the hours of days that they work, the length of time that they work, the life cycles, to see where is the highest, the most optimal performance, and then also the most bugs. Is this something that the industry is learning about now, or trying to incorporate, or do you see the very practitioners that we're talking about, the talent, if you will, in this ecosystem beginning to adapt the way that they work?
Absolutely. I think people are adapting. Cloud native infrastructure is seeping into traditional infrastructure, and we're seeing them recruiting more DevOps folks. We're seeing security teams recruiting talents with development background and vice versa. So I really think that folks are coming to this collaboration model as the future of DevOps and DevSecOps.
Interesting. Caroline?
Yeah, I just want to provide a brief comment, which is that when it comes to setting up incentive models, my understanding is that what engineers don't want to do is they don't want to do unplanned work and they don't want to do rework. So to the extent that the incentive models can say, look, if you engage with the security team and assuming, of course, I think that the security team is trying to understand the way that engineering works and trying to make engagement seamless, positioning not doing the right thing as leading to unplanned work or rework, I think sort of naturally gets at people where, you know, they're like, no, I don't want to do that.
I also think there's a trend of treating security just another software bug as opposed to a special class thing, right? Even though it could be a special class thing that requires different ways to fix, but just having the engineers think about mentally that security is just another bug, it helps them to really put that into their normal workflow and fix it as it goes.
Indeed. As we go to the next slide, you know, Ryan, so you've heard some incredibly interesting insights. You've contributed to some, you know, as well. You know, what's your kind of key takeaways, you know, for our audience? What are 2 or 3 things that, from your perch, having been deeply involved in this, they should take away?
Yeah, we've just hit on the incentives. We've talked about incentive structures, either implied or directly, over the course of this hour. I think that's one of the key takeaways. Get people aligned. Whether you're starting your DevOps development program, or whether you're kind of well into it and looking for ways to strengthen your security program, look for and be creative about how to get everybody focused in the same direction. If you whether you're creating those user stories around proactive things that can happen, talk to your front end teams about cross-site scripting protection as a project that they may engage in, and look at ways to solve those problems. There are many examples depending on what kind of solutions you're building, but look for ways to get everybody aligned. Look for ways to create harmony so that you're all moving in the same direction. If you do that, you're going to be successful, and you're going to build and inherit from this increasing maturity in your organization overall.
Indeed, that makes a lot of sense. Caroline, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience to amplify your message?
I think that what I'd encourage folks to do is to really consider not only how software is being developed in their organizations today, but actually how they plan to develop software 12 months from now, 3 months from now, and to consider, are the security activities that I'm doing going to work in the future? Is that actually going to mesh well with our engineering practices, or do I need to start thinking differently?
And how would you advise a company, let's say a small to medium business, you know, who may not have all the resources of enterprises in this arena, you know, what simple things can they do?
So I think that something that's actually a business driver for small businesses is for them to ask their customers, what security requirements do you expect of us? I have found that when it comes to small businesses, if the customer is asking for it, it tends to get done pretty easily and pretty quickly, relatively speaking. And I think that today, a lot of organizations that are buying from SMBs, a lot of customers actually do want security controls in place. And so I'd encourage security leadership at SMBs to leverage the customer perspective to get sort of focus and investment in terms of security activities.
Which, you know, is a very interesting series of things you're saying there, one of which is the importance of securing supply chains. You know, maybe you can share with our audience, you know, a little bit about how your system can help that or inform that.
Sure. So certainly we've got a lot of folks who come to us saying, I need a pen test because my prospective customer wants to see a pen test. And what this tells me is that, and we can experience it ourselves, right? Cobalt is a company that builds software. We leverage so many different products and services that become ours. And there are so many organizations that use our product and service. So today, there are so many software organizations in the world that are in this really interesting situation of being both a customer as well as a vendor. Today, our software ecosystems are interconnected. And in the past, when you had large privately owned data centers. You had all software and hardware on premise. You know, stuff took a really long time to deploy. And so what was super important was relationships between, for example, the CEO of a vendor and the CIO of the customer. Today with SaaS, that model is completely different. Everyone is buying from everyone. Everyone is selling to everyone. We are all super interconnected. And what this means is that our security postures are all interconnected. And so pen testing is one example of a practice that organizations can do as they're interacting with all of these different software products and services to say, when I do business with you, your risk posture is going to affect my risk posture. And can I actually quantify that? Can I actually have information about that that is actionable that I can make decisions on?
And actually, you said earlier about exercising due care, you know, in a fiduciary sense. And so with this in mind, Chenxi, what are your final thoughts to amplify your message? And if you allow me a moderator's privilege, please tell folks how they can get more information about some of the great stuff you're doing, maybe a copy of the report, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, Caroline, correct me if I'm wrong, the copy of the report is available on Cobalt website, right?
That's absolutely correct. Go to www.cobalt.io/resources, and you'll find this white paper in its full form. I want to say that it's probably between like 20, 30, maybe even 40 pages. So, you know, I think that what the three of us were discussing today is really just kind of scratching the surface. There's so much depth of content, and we really wanted to share this with everyone. So it's absolutely no cost. I encourage folks to check it out. Thank you, Chenxi.
Yeah, and as the theme of the webinar is about organizations moving faster in software development, and security has to come along with it. And pen testing as a service is an example of such a transformation, going from traditional security methods to more of a DevSecOps delivery to fit this more agile and faster delivery model. And there are a lot of other things also happening in the security world, such as policy as code, infrastructure as code, all with the same goal of larger scale management, larger scale automation, and be able to move faster, move at the speed of business. So that will be my final thoughts. And I'm very excited about this phase of security industry that we're going through, because finally we're moving at the speed of business, meaning that the requirements for innovation for security technology are finally here, and we see so much innovation coming out of the industry. It's a very exciting time.
Indeed. And on that upbeat note, thanks so much, Chenxi, you know, Ryan and Caroline. This was incredibly interesting. As I mentioned, we have 4 lucky winners for today's $25 Amazon gift card, and they are Charles K., Daniel M., Kevin D., and Monica R. Someone from the DevOps team will send you an email to confirm your address and get the card over to you. And as I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded. The slides and also links to this great report and other information will be available on demand at devops.com in a couple of hours. So thanks again for spending an hour of your valuable time with us. Thanks again for our wonderful guests. I learned so much. So in the meantime, stay safe and be well.